everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. So if you want to chat with us, please use the chat function below. And we'd love for you to just come and say hi. So we've got Dr. Thomas Ernst here and James McIntosh. Okay, so if everyone is ready, the event will start now. So thank you so much for joining us on this live event with Let's Knit Together, James McIntosh and Dr. Thomas Ernst. My name's Eleanor and I work on the team at Let's Knit Together, the UK's friendliest knitting community. If you aren't a member, and I know we've got so many members here joining us, we would love for you to come and join the community. And you can sign up for just £1 for your first month, and you'll have access to over 2,000 patterns, 80 videos, an online Facebook community, and so much more. And we really would love to welcome everyone watching into the club. Now, before we start, I'm just going to run through some housekeeping points. We'd like to let you know that this call is being recorded. And if you are a member of Let's Knit Together watching via Zoom, the chat function is being monitored by your Let's Knit Together team. And remember to interact with us via the chat function and send in your questions. We'd really love to hear from you this evening. So that's all the housekeeping points done. So let's get started. Let's Knit Together is really pleased to welcome James McIntosh and Dr. Thomas Ernst tonight. James and Dr. Thomas are the award-winning duo behind both Knit and Nibble and McIntosh Yarn. So their story is one of how life, when slowed down, allows wellness to blossom one stitch at a time, of which our members and readers know all too well. Dr. Thomas Ernst is a senior consultant physician at a leading central London teaching hospital and a fellow of the Royal College of Physicians. Dr. Thomas has both inpatients and outpatients under his care. His inpatients are geriatrics and his outpatients are related to autonomics. That's faints, dizzy spells, and blackouts to you and me. Dr. Thomas uses mindfulness, both personally and professionally, to treat his patients. And from what we understand, he's the only consultant doctor in the NHS to do so. So in really good hands tonight. James McIntosh, who you will all know from Let's Knit magazine, is Dr. Thomas's fiance. 5 years ago, James suffered from what was termed as a moderately severe depressive episode. Dr. Thomas suggested James should practice mindfulness, but James was unable to do it. As you see, James is a self-confessed fidgeter. So James and Dr. Thomas worked together to produce Knititation, a mindful approach to hand knitting for fidgeters. And they wrote the world award-winning book, Knit and Nibble, and subsequently developed the hand-dyed wool company, McIntosh. James and Dr. Thomas, thank you so much for speaking to us tonight. I cannot wait to hear your amazing story of love, illness, survival, and hope.
Thank you, Eleanor. Well, good evening. How are you? Have you got your cuppa ready and something to nibble on? And what about your knitting? I'm James, and this is Dr. Thomas, or Tommy to me, or him indoors, really. And we just love doing these talks.
Really?
Well, it's the first time that we've done one live streamed. So please do use your wave button, say hello so we can see you, and let us know you're out there. And in the comments, let us know what's on your knitting needles or on your crochet hook this evening. And is anybody doing any of the Let's Knit Together knit-alongs? Thomas and I live in the posh part of Peckham in South East London, next to a certain hotel with a yellow robined reliant outside. You see, Del Boy is still in Peckham. But I don't know if your home is like ours. But we currently have 3 rooms just brimming with beautiful, beautiful wool.
Really?
Yes, Thomas, really. So please, come on, help me. Put in the comments below and let me know where you hide your stash of wool. Come on, tell the truth, because give me some ideas. See if my relationship, you see, we were to get married on the 10th of May, but because of Corona, this has been cancelled and the registry office is only at the bottom of the lane next to the Yellow Robin Reliant. And I don't know when we're getting married, so please help me until we can get the legals done to have my 3 rooms of wool. Where do you hide your stash? You see, when Thomas hears our doorbell ring, I just look sheepish, and then Thomas arrives into my den in our home holding these boxes. And he says to me in his wee boy voice, sporting his native German accent, going, "Not more wool, James, not more wool, we're drowning in the wool." But you see, Thomas is not stupid, but he also doesn't know the half of it. Nor does Thomas really understand the real need for extra wool. He doesn't understand that I would need to buy the 4-ply and the DK in a particular colorway for my wool stash, because I never know when that moment might strike and I would get the inspiration and the compulsion to cast something on in a fleeting moment. But what Thomas is not appreciating is that I'm being thoughtful and mindful, because I didn't go out to buy the Aran weight in that particular colorway as well. You see, Thomas, it's not all one-sided in our home. You see, my den is my stable, which stands for stash acquisition beyond life expectancy. How many skeins do I need? A little spare for darning, perhaps? Really? It's not about buy what you need, really, is it? It's about that delicious, soft colorway, that in knitting that, you know, you have this idea in your head when you see a skein, and let's be honest, you're probably never going to get round to knitting it. But that's not to be discussed in polite society. Yes, Thomas, I have filled up under my side of the divan bed, the spare bedroom, my den, and tell the truth here moment, and I've taken the side off the bath. It's amazing just how many skeins and cakes of yarn you can get into that lovely, clean, dry area underneath the bath. You can't say anything, because I do have you as the best dressed doctor in the hospital over the winter. This key worker sports can knit cashmere to work. So, Dr. Thomas, what's on your needles?
Patience.
You see, tonight we're going to talk about syndromes. I have at least one currently. It's second sleeve syndrome. You know, the one where you knit up the back and the front of a jumper and then one sleeve, and you go to start the other one, but all of a sudden you see a new delicious colorway of wool. You just have to buy it. So you take that work in progress, you put it into a bag called your PhD, your project half done, and you hang it up. Why don't you be like me? There's no need to have one project on the go when you can have 32. You see, I'm not alone with these syndromes. Dr. Thomas has a constantly annoying one. He always moans and complains about it. The official title, I believe, is wool myopia. He can't see the difference in 2 skeins or 20. All he says he sees is wool. But as the good doctor and I will tell you tonight, wool, and beautiful wool, saved my life. And it changed our world. But before we talk about that, we have a wee bit of a legal statement. Participation in Knititation and mindfulness-based interventions is entirely voluntary. Neither McIntosh, Aceville Publications, James McIntosh, or Dr. Thomas Ernst can be held responsible or liable for any wanted or unwanted side effects through participation in Knititation or mindfulness or the content of this talk. If you have any questions, please see your own doctor first. So there you have it. Check with your doctor before knitting. Talking about doctors, let me introduce Dr. Thomas Ernst, a fellow of the Royal College of Physicians, my fiance, but certainly not my doctor. Over to you, Thomas.
Thank you, James. Thank you so much. Thank you. So we have talked many times about mindfulness before with James, but we've never really focused so much on the science. So far we talked about the amazing story of what James achieved using Knititation. So this is more about the background of mindfulness in general. So I want to give a definition of mindfulness. Then I want to talk a bit about how Knititation fits into that. Introduce you a little bit to what structural changes on the brain you might see, and then draw a little bit on evolutionary science and the history there, and also a little more about how you get started with some research and some biological effects. So starting off with a definition, so we've got some slides, so if you'll be able to read it. The definition of mindfulness is really always what's in the center of it all, and that is paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, without judging, analyzing, or changing the unfolding of the experiences moment by moment. So that's something to always remember. So whatever task you do to focus on, such as knitting or the more traditional meditation, what you're actually trying to do is, in the background, allow all sensations in the body, in the room, just to happen as little as possible, changed or analyzed by yourself. So that's the centerpiece of really of what we're trying to do in mindful knitting as opposed to normal knitting. That's Knititation for us. So knitting is obviously what we're talking mainly about, but I mean, there are some more traditional forms like mindfulness-based stress reduction, cognitive therapy, people like yoga, Tai Chi, Pilates, but today we want to focus much more on knitting. So in knitting, the knitting becomes the mental focus. The mind wanders off, and then of course the next stitch comes and you're just trying to bring it back. And that might repeat itself over and over, yeah? And the rest that happens in the body and in the world around you, you just simply let happen. So why do we do this? And that's really where the research starts and the science starts. And the main thing that really made a huge difference is that we had functional MRI scanning, or this here, what you see is a single photo emission computer tomography. That's slicing through your brain and taking pictures, but instead of giving actual structure so much, it is more about which areas are actually active. Yeah. So on the left here you see the baseline, so that person is not meditating, and we call that very much a cold brain. There's not much activity. And on the right, it's just doing a single meditation. You can see that there's a lot more lightening up. This is just for illustration only. They're not actually real images from real patients, but it gives you a rough idea what these images look like. And that's been consistently and consistently found in the literature. So we'll have a look a little bit what type of brain, next slide, is we're going to activate. So this leads us a little bit to evolutional history. So this shows you where we come from. And the key thing is to understand that our bodies are not the first bodies, so next version of your mom and dad, and there's theirs, and there's theirs, and then we go all the way back to the sort of Neanderthals, and then we go back to apes, and which is part of mammals, and then we go back to reptiles, amphibians, fish, which is where the first brain occurs in our ancestry line. And then we go back to the non-brained creatures, like simple animals, jellyfish, amoeba, and so forth. And then we go to the single-cell organisms that weren't able to move. And of course, all of us repeat this from a single-cell organism, the mother's egg cell and the father's sperm. We repeat this all in the mother's womb. So really, all of us were once upon a time a jellyfish, then a fish, then a reptile, mammal, and human. And that happened all in 3 months in the womb, what in real life took about 3 billion years. So really, the moment our body gets born, it is about 3 billion years old. And next, a new edition of a very ancient creature going back billions of years. And the brain also, so our unconscious brain, it's a brain we inherited also during that process, growing with that process from fish onwards. That brain is 1.7 billion years old. Now, don't quote me in a few years here. In the research, we're not entirely sure how many years this exactly is, but it's very, very old. And of course, a small subset of our brain is where our conscious brain lies. And then, of course, starts only ticking from our birth. And usually, really, what we can remember starts about 2 years later, 3 years later. The earliest most people remember is about 3 years of age. So that's basically the background. So next slide, please. So I came up with this concept, and what you see here is the body at the bottom. This blue dot schematically. Then you've got the input from, of course, the sensations from the body, pain, temperature, but also then the sensations from the nerves out of the face. So that's eyes, ears, in particular. And then it enters the first part of the brain, sort of imagine behind the sort of ridge of the nose. You know, that's really where first it enters, and that's where our consciousness lies, deep in the brainstem, and everything goes there first. And we've got basically 2 options. We can either process whatever we see with our conscious brain, drawing on our own experiences and what we've learned, and then come up with an output. But so far, we haven't really used all that evolved brain. Remember, coming back to fish, yeah, we haven't really used that yet. So let's just see what happens when we practice mindfulness. Yeah. So James, show me the next slide. So what we're really doing here is we are connecting the evolved brain. So that's the brain we've inherited since fish, with our conscious brain. We sort of work more in collaboration. So that's where our intuitions lie. That's where all sorts of things lie. And unfortunately, with aging, this gets undermined. We get more and more trained to use our conscious brain mainly, and less trained to use this intuitive, evolved brain. And as a result, our decisions become less and less good over time. So there's one little caveat, and that's what's important to mention. And I want you to know that, because there's a caveat when not to do mindfulness. So in the next slide, I show that. Yeah, next slide, that was good. And so there you see a little black bar in the center, and that's what we call the subconscious brain. And it's a bit like the cellar. You know, we all have like memories we don't like to remember, and we like to stick them somewhere where they are not bothering us. And that's in the subconscious brain. And unfortunately, when we try to push with the mindfulness practice into the evolved brain, we sometimes hit little things in that sort of cellar, that storage space, yeah, and that might sometimes come back. So we get memories from the past back. So just be aware of that. If you've got a lot of traumatic memory, you might not want to do this alone, but have a therapist. But for most people, that's not the case. So in the next slide, we have, yeah, just stop now, the sharing. So the next thing I want to talk about is how do we practice? Well, the most simple thing for a fidgeter is to have a sort of craft like knitting, which allows that process to have with a little bit more of a complex focus. So instead of using the more traditional focus of breathing, which is hard for people to focus on sometimes, we use a much more complex task in the center, and that's easier for busy minds. Yeah, but there are other ways of doing it as well, which I don't want to go too much into in this talk, because this is really about Knititation. But key thing is really to continue, to keep practicing, yeah, to not stop, because what sometimes happens is that we encounter boredom. Yeah, so you might start with a practice and all of a sudden you feel extremely bored. You're tempted to stop. It's not really the purpose of it. The purpose is to carry on practicing and trying to overcome the boredom, trying to overcome the fears, trying to overcome those few things that we're hiding in our cellar, we don't normally want to encounter, and just keep moving on. And sooner or later you'll overcome it. It's not a problem. Just keep doing. Yeah. So keep practicing. Don't read up too much about it. That doesn't really work. And don't Google it and don't analyze it, because that doesn't really work at all. So in terms of research, what do we know about mindfulness in general? There's lots of research done, more and more research done every day. And the key thing is reduction in stress. So the meta-analysis, which is looking at lots of high-quality studies, the meta-analysis of those high-quality studies shows a 50% reduction of stress scores. And these are high-quality studies of very, very good databases, and also anxiety reduction by 50%. It's really powerful. There's nothing around quite like it. Not even medication that are often favored by people. Lots of side effects, of course, which I wouldn't advocate them for unless they're absolutely needed, in which case it can sometimes be helpful in combination with the mindfulness in order to make it more possible, but never really on its own, if possible. We can prevent relapse of depression, and that's actually recommended by the National Institute of Healthcare Excellence. So we use it for that. We can reduce chronic pain. We reduce psychological features of diseases, and then nasty diseases like fibromyalgia, really sore muscles in the back, and a number of other diseases which are including cancer. So randomized controlled trials is not quite so strong evidence, but still very, very, very good. Show that you can have much success with weight loss. So people after a while just manage their energy household better and lose weight naturally by creating energy out of that weight, rather than trying to burn it off through exercise. So it's actually a good thing. You feel more energetic and have less weight, because the energy from the fat usually is then used to make energy, which is all what we want, of course. Yeah. We can also withdraw from substances, from alcohol. It's used there, and we can improve sleep and improve trauma memories, as long as it's long in the past. It allows us to re-engage with that trauma and find it again, and get over it in that way. And there's also some emerging evidence that we can use these things outside the more traditional backgrounds, like the facilitator courses that we have in mindfulness-based stress reduction, sort of an 8-week course, and it's quite regimented, and it's not very accessible for people. So the general, we know, can use technology, but also be experimenting with crafts like with knitting. This is what obviously we're talking about today. Yeah. Key thing is that just now with the NHS being under such a strain, and lots of people are being under strain, MBSR, which is the more formal way of practicing mindfulness, has shown that it reduces burnout in healthcare professionals, nursing staff, medical staff, and other staff working under high pressure. But of course, all of you, I'm sure some of you will also work under very high pressure. So that's really, really important. What biological effects do we have? So that's really more for the people with a sort of a scientific brain. I won't run too long on it, but reduction of pro-inflammatory cytokines. So those are substances that the body excretes to kill off bacteria and fight, and they're raised in stressful conditions and make the body age, and that is definitely reduced. So interleukin-6 is one of the biggest offending ones that causes a lot of damage to the body, and that is reduced. But also cortisol level, which is very strongly related to brittle bones, reduced immunity, and so forth. So that is really, really important. The other thing we found is that there's actually more grey matter. So that's kind of brain cells.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, good. More
brain cells in the brain, and it's actually increasing. Something people never thought possible, that we can actually increase the number of brain cells, but we can. Yeah. So the other thing we can do is increase insulin sensitivity, which is the main problem in diabetes. And again, that's a good thing. So not many things have been able to do that in medicine. So that's good. What else can we do in terms of functions? If you look at people who practice mindfulness, what can they do after a while of practicing that they weren't able to do before? Well, number one is they can attend better. So they can hold attention for much longer. They have a better working memory, so don't all of a sudden have memory lapses and can't remember, like, for example, me talking, all of a sudden not knowing my line, which of course you notice I've already done.
Which you do.
It's quite natural to do that. So it's not always pathological, but you have more verbal fluency. Yeah? So you give talks like this more easily, and you tend to have a better logical memory. So it's better to practice science, for example. And most importantly, it prevents age-related cognitive decline. Yeah.
So that's dementia and things.
Not dementia, because we haven't got evidence for that. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but it means the normal decline in cognition with aging, which is natural. So it's not a disease, but that is reduced. So you stay sharper longer. Yeah. Whether we can reduce dementia is to be seen. I suspect actually we could if you start early enough, which is now when we're young. Well, not that young anymore, but the younger you start, the better. And of course, the important thing is it persists beyond the practice. So don't worry, you start, you might stop, you won't lose what you've gained. You know, you just simply keep what you have until you start practicing again. And some people want to have a break, and that's fine. So that's really what I wanted to say, and I hope that that's been useful. I see there are lots of comments already coming up on the system. So yeah, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Thomas, and thank you for explaining about the way it all works medically with mindfulness. And what we're going to do is I'm going to tell you my story and how we put it all together to develop Nessitation. And it's the story of how I found colour in my life. So much so that I now started and own a wool company called McIntosh. We wrote the book called Knit and Nibble. And when I start talk about finding colour, I'm talking about embracing life, surrounding myself with difference and seizing every opportunity that I can learn from to widen my spectrum of life, to enhance me as a person. You see, I grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere in Northern Ireland. It was beautiful and peaceful, providing you were Protestant, straight and ordinary. There was no ethnic diversity. There were no roles for me in society, no role models. And as a young man who was growing up gay, I was very, very lonely. Holding a great secret and avoiding the questions in my teenage years, asking if I had a girlfriend. Because of the culture back then, I spent the first 18 years of my life living in shame. I worked hard, moved to Scotland to study for a degree. I remember the day of my last exam. While all my classmates went to the pub for one last hurrah, I jumped in my car and drove south to London. I knew it was my best and in reality my only option for a content life because of my sexuality. I was young, I had energy. It was like having an infinitive yolk sack of energy attached to me that I could feed from. A continuous flow and supply of energy. I worked hard in my career. I was lucky enough to travel the world with work. Global awards followed. I packaged it all up. I returned home to my beloved Northern Ireland as the chap. We did well to bring quite a lot of international investment home in food and tourism. Heaven knows Northern Ireland needed the investment. But my honesty at the age of 35 about my sexuality was my downfall. I was ridiculed, my name was sullied, and that what I had, my infinite yolk sack of energy, it all just dried up. To say I was 35, this was only 2015. My self-respect, my self-worth, and my want to live was removed from me. I returned back to London. I collapsed. Suddenly I was very scared and afraid. I woke up one morning and I couldn't physically move my leg down the bed. I was diagnosed with what was termed as a moderately severe depressive episode. What was interesting was silence was the loudest noise I'd ever experienced. And in my silence, all that went through my head was, what was wrong with me for this to go wrong? The rumination of these questions in my mind was my biggest downfall, and it would not stop. And this is where knitting fixed it, and we'll come to this in a minute. My head got faster and faster, trying to understand why I was thrown under a proverbial bus by people with their prejudices. But I'm sure, like me, you all know someone, if not yourself or a family member, who has suffered depression, anxiety, panic attacks, or what I just call the fear, when you're just waking up and you just shudder. You know, we all know the statistics. And this year, due to Corona, it's tougher. But I'm not ashamed I suffered. And I'm really proud to talk about it. But I thought about life, and I realised that the biggest problem for me was something that I really learned in Northern Ireland. And it's called blame. And I've got to the point that blame, it's not something new. It's not something that we need to have, because it does your mental wellness no good. Blame doesn't fix things. Blame needs revenge. Nobody actually wants to hear the story you want to tell. And revenge never helped anyone. What I've learned through having a mental breakdown was that blaming others is only your personal defense of not being able to stand in their shoes and feel the weight of of somebody else's burdens in life. I'm past blame. It wastes my energy. You don't want to hear it. It makes my soul feel heavy. Rather, I turned it all around with 2 knitting needles, some lovely wool for my own mental health, and it allowed me to find colour along the way. You see, I was struggling through all of this, and I was angry after what happened to me, but love wins. It really does. Thomas would say to me, don't fight, and the whole thing changes. And I didn't want to hear him say that, but I trusted my partner of 9 years, and love did win. You see, I was born on a very interesting day, the 16th of May, 1978, the same day as YMCA entered the British charts, as it happens. I was 3 years of age in 1983 when homosexuality was decriminalised in Northern Ireland. It was 1967 in England and Wales, and that left Northern Ireland 16 years behind what the Crown had signed into law. Therefore, my start in life was I was born criminal, immoral, sinful, and mentally ill, according to the society I grew up in. But I was different and unique, and I was me. I'd worked hard in life. I became very successful. I was the only Westerner to ever present food television in China, above all places. I used to get about 100 million viewers a week on my TV shows, and I won the equivalent of a BAFTA in communist China as a Westerner. I also was the global ambassador for Aga cookers. I launched them all over the world, and I had the chance to bring them to launch them in China too. And then Farmers Weekly magazine entitled me as Britain's Food Ambassador of the Year in 2012. See, I had this big success early in life, and then it all went wrong. Fear, anxiety, this catatonic physical state, this darkness in my head, it was tough. So I realized I've never done anything normally, so the midlife crisis is not going to be normal either. So I lost the sports car and I adopted for the older model in the form of Dr. Thomas, who does not look so good in a bikini, I believe, but does look great in a raglan sweater. My head was the deepest black. I had no energy. The depth of sadness in my head was too much to bear. I could not sleep. I could not eat. I could not function. I'd lost me. I was conscious my life was wasting away. I felt shame from this, and there were these circles going on. I couldn't do anything. I was ill. I'm falling apart. And then I always joked that if I lived in Thomas's native Germany, I'd be given the title of Frau Doktor. But instead, in Britain, I was given the title of the doctor's wife. You see, Thomas meditates for 3 hours a day, every day. I know. But his dedication to the practice of mindfulness is a blessing, and it shows its fruits in our lives, both together and separate. His hours are so long and demanding. But through my illness, Thomas would come home every night and cook and clean and feed me and help me to the bathroom. I was scared to leave the bedroom. But I don't remember why I started to knit, but I found 2 chopsticks and a piece of string in the flat. I watched YouTube. I learned how to cast on, and before I knew it, I'd created a knitted something or other. I showed it to Thomas when he came in from work, and he says, let's buy some wool. So he bought me these 12mm big boys, and I knit this thing. I couldn't read a pattern at the time, and I couldn't understand sizing and knitting patterns either. It's beige alpaca, but beige was as much as my mind could bear. It was as much colour. And you know what? This shapeless trophy to my good health, it lives at the back of our wardrobe, and it will for the rest of my life. And you know why? Because the moths never eat the ugly items, do they? But I remember putting that shapeless garb on me, looking in the mirror, feeling that I was proud of me again, because it was something I created, albeit looking like a grown-up fun-trap child with knitted curtains for my clothing. And if you read my column in Let's Knit magazine last month in the March issue, you'll realise Thomas and I love the sound of music. But I thirsted for colours in so many ways. Colour is life and colour is healing. But beige was as bright as I could get. I phoned my mum one day saying my head was like a metal box and the hammers inside the box won't stop. Mums are great ladies. And within a few hours, my mum was in Peckham, in the posh part where we live. We started to talk. I started to get better. Mum got me to John Lewis. Mum knit the rib. I did the stocking stitch. He put it in the boil wash. I had to start again, both with my career, my life, and that boiled washed items. You see, the tablets were kicking in. I was getting better. A doctor's wife and antidepressants. Oh, stereotypes in this country are harsh. But one stitch and then another allowed a sense of calm. Slowly, one stitch allowed me to find my, what we call your circadian rhythm with my knitting needles. And each stitch for me became a breath. Each breath became a feeling. Each feeling acknowledged and understood. Each stitch a tangible product that my feelings are worth something, that I was finally worth something. Oh, the tablets are not a quick fix or happy pills, thoroughly boring pharmaceuticals, but if you need them, and there is no rush to come off them. There are side effects, but slowly as those knitted items grew from my needles, my confidence was growing, and it was because of knitting. The tatters of my mind were being knitted back together, one stitch at a time, to realize that my feelings and thoughts were valid. And as I knit and saw a stitch as my thoughts, I realized that a stitch in time saved my mind. I was never any good at this traditional mindfulness or meditation malarkey. You see, I'm a fidgeter, as I've said. Sitting still and feeling the present moment doesn't work for me. Embrace the negatives, he would say. Don't hide them. Learn to love your negatives. I didn't want to do this. It was too painful and daunting. Moreover, I didn't understand what he was on about. I mean, negatives? Who wants negatives? Negatives aren't nice things. My head was dark. I'm not into more mental sadomasochism. So it goes, embrace your negatives, embrace your negatives. But unbeknown to me, at that point, the key was that two negatives make a positive. Thomas explained mindfulness again. I couldn't do it. He suggested mindful movements. So wasn't having that. I mean, I don't do yoga, Pilates, Tai Chi. Not for me. No, next. So I went back to knitting. I call this Nessitation, a mindfulness practice that brought joy back to my life through hand knitting. What I found was that panic subsides, anxiety subdues, worry is dealt with by your body. It knows what to do when you just spend time with it. I learned the body is the answers. You just need to spend time with your body. I wrote the book called Knit and Nibble. It's been a huge success for us. It allowed me to start my business again. Allowed me self-worth again. But whoever said that overcoming depression was easy? I'm no longer depressed. And then tragedy really struck Thomas and I. We lost both of our mums within 9 months of each other to cancer. We've both had COVID-19 twice, and life is very stressful for Thomas's job. Statistics are really clear about depression. I'm at a higher chance of suffering depression again after a tsunami event like losing a parent, and we have lost two, than somebody who didn't have depression before. I'm sad. I'm grieving, but it's all at natural levels, and I've been able to refine the balance because my biggest fear was that with mum dying that I would go back into that dip of depression. But as long as I practice my Knititation for at least 1 hour a day, every day, my health is good. So what am I doing now? Well, I opened up my own wool company. It's all hand dyed and it's beautiful. It's pure wool. I'm so proud of it that from what I've worked through to be where I am now, that I even put my own name on it, McIntosh. I work hard to have a financial, sustainable and ethical and environmental ethics in the business. Everything is natural and sustainable, including happy sheep that are well cared for and biodegradable laminate on our yarn bands. I pay local yarn shops to stock McIntosh rather than have these small and vitally important shops in our communities having to pay me for stock and holding stock in these difficult times. So what have I found? I found through Knititation that my best friend, and he's worth getting to know, I've become really close to him. He's all right, you know. I like him. I've learned to love him. And I've learned to spend a lot of time with him. I found my best friend was me. And I found that Whitney Houston was right. Learning to love yourself is the greatest gift of all. And when you learn this, which I did through knitting, no one can ever take away your dignity. My dreams, I can have them again. My hopes are becoming a reality. Life is good. Dr. Thomas has learnt not to put knitted items into the boil wash. I can now say with confidence that I am James McIntosh. I am well, I am back, and it's because of hand knitting that I am here, that I am alive, I am strong, and I can conquer life one stitch at a time. Stitches are life. Knitting patterns are just our manual. A stitch in time saved my mind. We call it Nessitation. Don't stop loving. Keep telling the truth. Embrace the difference. Forgive, forget blame, and live life in colour.
Thank you so much, both of you. That was such an interesting talk. I found it so insightful, and I hope everyone watching did as well. Please let us know in the comments. I know a lot of you have been using the chat function to talk to us, so to read out a few of the comments now. Karen says she is knitting a jumper whilst watching us. Kirsty says, congratulations on the engagement. What else? Sue Winter has just finished a rainbow knit-along blanket and she used up all her leftover wool from previous products, but she's now got a lovely warm blanket for her caravan when she gets back out there. And Fiona Hines says her yarn stash is in boxes all over the house, mostly hidden from her husband. So thanks everyone for chatting away with us on the chat function. If it's okay with you two, we've had some questions sent in prior to the event, and so I'm just going to go through a few of them. We have a little bit of time left at the end, so
Certainly.
read out some questions. Okay, so the first one is for you, Dr. Thomas, and they say, I don't have time to practice mindfulness. How do you find the time when you have such a busy job?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that is not easy. In the beginning, quite honest, I was literally burnt out. I worked about 14, 15 hours a day. And I just took about an hour's sleep out of my very little sleep at the time. But out of that hour became more time. For some reason, my whole job became easier because of doing mindfulness. And that then created more time. And actually now I work very reasonable hours. Still too long, I think, James, I think, but nonetheless, now in my days I'm more reasonable. So mindfulness creates time. And then you get more time. You reinvest it into it more, and so forth. So that's what I did.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, that's such a good way to think of it. Another question. I went on the 8-week mindfulness course, and there was no mention of knitting or Knititation. How does Knititation fit in? Yeah, I mean,
it's you.
Yeah. I mean, it's Not very well researched because largely it's a funding issue. There's no money in funding knitting because there's no money to be made from it compared to medicines and tablets. So we've got very little research, but it is obviously James's story which promoted us to kind of do this, but this is clearly only one person so far. But there are lots and lots of people who've described benefits. Betts and Corkhill did once a study, and that's probably the most important to quote, which is more a survey looking at people who knit, and they found a lot of improvement in their wellness. But that's really at the moment it. We hope that obviously the future will be different and people will invest in research, but more formal research, you know. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, hopefully more research. Another question. Is there any proof that Nessitation is good for my wellness?
Well, I can only quote Betts and Corkhill again. I mean, she's sort of a hero doing all the...
Well, you can look at my life story, Thomas.
But James's life story really, we thought it's important. And what James's life story shows is something that nothing else has yet shown. And that's actually doing a mindfulness exercise during the depression is actually pulling people out. And so far, we haven't got much to fill that gap. I mean, prior to using drugs in medicine and psychiatry, we actually used a lot more crafting. Very little evidence was pushed away because felt, you know, the drugs are better. But actually, I think we're coming a little bit back now, you know, the life is a bit circular, isn't it? So a lot of psychiatry units now start using crafting again after it's been thrown out about 10 years ago. So that's a good sign. Yeah, but I mean, yeah, if you want to strictly say, is there any proof like randomized controlled trials and meta-analysis? There isn't.
What's meta-analysis?
Well, that's looking at many studies, high-quality studies.
Just keep it.
That's sort of thing.
Check with your doctor first.
Yeah.
Just remember what we said at the start.
But I mean, I take the view, if it's not likely to be harmful, and knitting really has been practiced for donkeys of years, then actually, why not do it? You know, you can't lose. And that's really why I give these talks before we can do the studies. And hopefully the other way around, we get some interest in knitting and then people start wanting to research it. So I'm hoping for that. So any people who've got money, let me know.
Wonderful.
Any more, Elna?
Yeah, we've got one more. I'm just going to read through a couple more of the chat comments that have come in. So Jean says, Thomas and James, an excellent talk. Thank you.
Oh.
Tessa says, I'm lucky in that my husband actually buys me yarn. I still have to find somewhere to hide some of it though. And Russet says, I'm crocheting as watching. Knitting has been my stress buster for years. So yeah, we've got some really lovely comments coming in.
Can I just say, Sue Winter, your comment on knitting a very delayed second sleeve right now. Do you want to come to our house when lockdown's over? Because there's about 30 you could finish for me.
Thank you. And so yeah, we've just got one more question that came in before the event, and this one is for you, James. And it says, how are you coping with depression and lockdown?
As long as I knit for an hour a day, every day, there are waves and troughs of life, but I'm finding this week very hard with Mother's Day coming up, for the first one since my mum passed away. And it can be a very cruel day, which I had never realized before. And this is a hard week for me. So I just knit more because you can always make time to knit. I mean, you don't need to mop the floor every day. Well, I don't, you know, you can make time for you. And that's the important bit. And in the silence, you find the answers.
Brilliant. Yeah, knitting is always the answer, isn't it?
It is. And crochet.
Yes, of course.
Well done.
Thank you so much, Elna. And let's
Thank you. No, I've had a really nice evening. Last 50 minutes has just flown by. And I hope everyone watching has had a really nice time as well. Yes, thank you so much for being here.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, and those of other genders, of course, thank you for spending your evening with us.
If you'd like to buy a copy of Knit and Nibble or some of our beautiful McIntosh wool, simply visit knitmacintosh.com, and if you use the promo code, and it's all one word, Let's Knit Together, we'll give you 15% off and free UK postage until this Saturday.
And just remember, take life just one stitch at a time. You're worth it. Breathe, notice the moment, and let's knit together. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.